And we just want to welcome any viewers who are just joining us tonight here on The National to bring special breaking coverage of a devastating story that's unfolding tonight. There has been a mass shooting in the small community of Tumbler Ridge, British Columbia. At least 10 people, including the suspected shooter, are dead, most of them killed in the local high school. I'm Adrienne Arsenault. We're going to walk through all this with you together tonight. If the numbers are accurate so far, this appears to be the second worst school shooting in Canada, next to the 1989 École Polytechnique shooting in Montreal, where 14 students and a staff member were killed. This is a huge tragedy in this country. You're looking at where Tumbler Ridge is right now in it's northeast of Vancouver, about 1,200 kilometers northeast. You can see Dawson Creek and Chetwynd there. It's just right on the border with Alberta. So this is evolving. This is difficult. You're not seeing a lot of pictures because we don't have a lot yet. We don't have a lot of information. The questions are adding up at a frantic pace, even though people there are completely exhausted at this point. Families are still waiting to hear about their loved ones. The entire community is shaken. Many people spent hours in a lockdown. There was an alert issued at 2 p.m. The lockdown was lifted at 6 p.m. So many people did not know what was happening, managed to get in touch with their children at the school over the course of that time. Many of them are now just learning what exactly happened, who is dead, who is injured, but none of that information is yet public. John Hernandez is a reporter in Vancouver who's been trying to collate all the developments as they unfold, make some calls of his own. John, do you have any updates?
Yeah, well, I mean, we can start just from what happened here. 1:20 p.m. reports of an active shooter in Tumbler Ridge, northeastern BC here. Took police about 2 minutes to respond, and they confirmed that when they arrived at the site, Tumbler Ridge Secondary School, they found 6 people dead inside. 1 person died on their way to the hospital. 2 others were airlifted to the hospital with serious or life-threatening injuries, and 2 more people were found dead in a nearby residence. Police also said they found the shooter, originally described as a woman and addressed, dead inside the school of an apparent suicide. Now, about 25 people on top of these victims are being assessed for injuries and have been triaged at a local medical center. Police did address the media this evening. They did not release the identities of the victims or specify whether they were students or teachers or both. They're not identifying the shooter either. Have a listen.
We're still trying to determine a lot about the shooter at this stage right now. We believe we've been able to identify the shooter, but for privacy reasons and obviously for the conduct of the investigation, we're not releasing that information at that time until we're assured that we've connected with the appropriate people and identified things. Yeah, multiple injuries and multiple deceased were inside the school as officers progressed through the scene, locating them and triaging those events. We also located 2 deceased at another scene.
Now, meanwhile, the Premier did also speak this afternoon, accompanied by BC's Public Safety Minister. Mr. Premier Eby did say that he wants British Columbians to be patient as the RCMP conducts its investigation and informs family members who have been affected by this tragedy, and also called on British Columbians and the rest of Canada to send their love to Tumbler Ridge.
I'd like to take this opportunity to ask British Columbians, to ask all Canadians, to wrap the people of Tumbler Ridge, wrap these families with love. Not just tonight, but tomorrow and into the future. This is something that will reverberate for years to come.
And we are still waiting for an update from BC Emergency Health Services on the status of the 25 victims who are injured and are currently being triaged for medical treatment.
John, firstly, do you have any sense of when the ambulance services will talk? Have they given you a heads up on that yet?
We're still waiting to find out. We're hoping we'll get that information tonight. The Premier did say that other facilities extended their services to help people that were injured. We do understand that Tumbler Ridge is a small community with relatively modest health services. There's only 2,400 people that live there. So obviously this is a place where people know each other, and people are concerned if their loved ones, friends, family were affected by this tragedy. We did speak with some residents today who were still wondering what was going on when they were locked down, and I began hearing rumors about victims, about the shooter, about what had happened. Have a listen.
And this really, I mean, there's that sense of quietness, safety. These things are things that happen elsewhere. They don't happen here. And that's been shattered.
Something that we've been hearing, a bit of a theme, things like that don't happen here. We rarely ever hear about tragedies like this happening in Canada, and undoubtedly a lot of people affected by this tragedy in Tumbler Ridge, and we'll wait to hear who these victims were in the coming days, I suppose, here.
Absolutely. We need to name them. We need people to get to know who they were. That will happen in time. John Hernandez, thanks very much. We'll check back in with you as soon as we can. Ian, I'm going to head back to you, if I may. Just listening to what John was saying, and also going back to that conversation with Darryl, he was describing a small school, but so spread out, so that while he was in lockdown in one part after being in his mechanics class, he thinks it might have been happening in another wing of the school. This is consistent, yes, with what you'd heard about a library or something?
I mean, I haven't heard a lot about what happened inside. It is interesting to me that such a small school would have so much distance that somebody could shoot and kill the number of people that the shooter did shoot and kill, and that he wouldn't have heard the gunshots. And the other thing is it may suggest that the shooting happened in one place as opposed to some school shootings where a shooter kind of moves throughout the school. But yeah, I guess we'll learn a lot more about this tomorrow as more people who are in the school start talking about it. The other thing I was going to say, Adrian, is that people, as we all kind of struggle to not make sense of this, but kind of put it in perspective. Some people are looking at, the mass shooting in Portapique, Nova Scotia, and the surrounding area. Some people looking at the school shooting in École Polytechnique. But I got to say that the way I feel tonight reminds me of that Saturday night, 2 nights before the last federal election, when we heard about the Lapu
Yes.
Tragedy, and somebody drove their vehicle into a crowd and killed, I believe, 11 people. The same, maybe it's just because it feels close to home, but the same sense of loss, the magnitude of the death, and just not being able to figure out why it happened.
No, and the why is important to people. Sometimes we never find out why it happened. I think about the mass shooting in Las Vegas, and it's terrible that there are all these examples to pull from, but there's a case where it was never actually determined what the motivation was.
Yeah.
Someone will know who this person was and maybe what was going on in their life. Someone will know about the weapon and how it was obtained and what kind it was and how relevant that is. All of that probably feels not important at all to people in Tumbler Ridge right now. These are not the details that matter to them right at this moment. It's just about their families and how people are. Earlier, Ian, you were listening as we spoke with CBC's Nicole Out, who is near the school where the shooting took place, and described the scene for us.
It is very dark. It's very quiet. Obviously, there was so much happening today, trying to help people here in this very small community. But now it is quiet. The only vehicles really that we've seen on the road are RCMP vehicles coming in and out of the scene. As well, just to give you an idea of how small this community is, down behind me is the high school. Literally, just over to my side here is the health center where 25 people were taken to be assessed and cared for. So just a very small community, and as we've been hearing, a community dealing with a huge tragedy.
So Nicole, as you're speaking, we were just speaking with Darian Quist and his mom Shelley. So Darian was at the school in mechanics class. His mom was at the health center when all this happened, and she said that the parents of those who were at the school were allowed to go home, and as they left, other people came in. But you're not talking about a place that has like an excess of healthcare workers. This is a place where the hospital, after 5, 6 o'clock at night, there was concern that there was no one on shift. What's this community like as a community? Can you describe it for us?
Yeah, it very small, you know, about 2,700 people here in the area. It is a very interesting community in that it sprang up in the early 1980s as an industry town with the mining. And lately they've really grown their tourism industry. There's quite a number of dinosaur bones that are here and tracks that have been discovered. But obviously such a big tragedy here now. Yeah, I will say that I am from a small town in northern British Columbia, and I can't even comprehend what this community is going through when I think of my own town.
And, you know, when something terrible happens, another terrible thing that happens is that, understandably, people are not happy to see cameras show up and reporters show up. Ian was talking about how difficult that is. Have you had a chance to connect with people at all? Are they more telling you something or asking you? Because there really isn't a lot of information we have right now.
Yes. So we haven't been able to talk to too many people here since we drove into the community from Fort St. John, though I have seen mentions about the people talking about CBC's coverage of this event, and just that we have been able to share information about what's happening, especially throughout the day. There was so little information about victims, the number of victims, what was happening, but also, yeah, we've heard people from not only here, but communities across British Columbia, across Canada, talking, about Tumbler Ridge and trying to express care and concern and just in some way comfort a community that has experienced something that, so many of us can't even comprehend.
So that's Nicole outside the Tumbler Ridge Secondary School. I want to paint you a picture again. This community is so small that the RCMP detachment, one reporter said he thought it was as many as just 5 RCMP officers at that detachment. Still, when the calls came in, within 2 minutes, those members were at the scene. So they threw everything they have. We all know this is a culture in Canada, certainly in policing, where they prefer to keep as much lockdown as they can while they investigate and have information come out as needed in their eyes, as people need to know. So we're not expecting to get a full display of everything yet. That will take some time before they realize what they're dealing with and before all the family members have been contacted. But there are questions, of course. So BC Premier David Eby went to the microphones earlier this evening. He was asked, aside from all the details of what happened, what his message is to parents who are now worried about sending their kids to school. Here's how he answered.
It's hard to know what to say on a night like tonight. This is the kind of thing that feels like it happens in other places and not close to home in a way that that this feels for so many British Columbians and Canadians. The devastation these families face, it's just impossible to understand what they're going through without going through it yourself. But I can say for myself, and I'm sure for many British Columbians, many Canadians, it makes us think about our kids' safety when they're going to school. We take it for granted. You go to school, you come home safe. And events like this give us pause about that safety that that many Canadians have the privilege to enjoy across this country. In the days and weeks to come, we'll look at this incident and try to understand what opportunities there are to learn from an unspeakable tragedy like this. But for tonight, it's about making sure that those families are receiving all the supports that they can.
And that is BC's Premier David Eby, a subdued, rattled person at the microphone tonight, trying to be calm for people here. I think one of the things that's been interesting as we have been listening to people's stories tonight is a few terms sort of roll off the tongues very, very easily, unfortunately. Hold and secure, these drills that happen at schools. Also the notice of a lockdown notification. I'm curious about how those work in BC and how often those happen. Ian, can you give us a sense about hold and secure in schools? You know, how police deal with that? Are there drills? What happens there?
I mean, a couple of things I'll tell you. I mean, my kids now are not kids anymore. They're 29 and 32, but when they went to public school here in Vancouver, there were fire drills. We would expect that. There were earthquake drills, a very BC thing, but there were also, and I forget, I don't think they were called shooter drills, but certainly drills if there was somebody in there that was a threat. And I remember for one of my sons, that was particularly traumatic, the idea of just going through that drill. And then in Metro Vancouver last week, I think over 3 days, we had a lot of schools where there were hold and secure alarms that, and police sometimes with guns drawn, from what I understand from a parent, in some of these schools, which was very unsettling, of course. And I don't think we fully understand or know what the threat was. Was it a hoax? In the end, nothing happened. But, you know, today is a reminder of the threat, rare though it is out there. And presumably in this case, there was no inkling beforehand, I presume. We certainly will find out that there was a threat here. But there are kids right across the country in an environment where they ought to feel safe, who are reminded that they may not be safe. And boy, I mean, tonight is like the thing we hear from people in Tumbler Ridge today is you never expect it to happen there. We don't expect this to happen anywhere in Canada, and it happens rarely. But when it happens, it certainly is devastating. No,
you expect that when you send your kids to school, they're going to come back. At a bare minimum, that's what you expect in this country, and that is not the case is very sad tonight, and will be very infuriating in the days to come when it starts to settle in and people start to realize what has happened. There are going to be a lot of hard questions. The alerts that moved, that told people to shelter in place, clearly saved a lot of lives. It sounds like those alerts did a very good job for the people of Tumbler Ridge. Is that a provincial system? Is that a municipal system? Do you have any sense of did they receive something on their phones? Was it a siren? What was it?
I don't know. I mean, I assume it was the provincial system and on their phones. I don't know. But I do know that at least a couple of people who we were speaking to tonight on the radio and television specials said it when they first got that alert, they thought it was, you know, a test or not for real. And it is a reminder, you know, our phones buzz for all kinds of reasons, including warnings now. It's the worst way to be reminded of this, but a reminder to take those seriously.
Absolutely. Ian, thank you. As we've been talking about Tumbler Ridge, I think we're all well aware that people who may be joining us now aren't necessarily completely familiar with where we're talking about. So let's take a look. It is situated in BC's northeastern Rockies. So you're talking about over 1,000 kilometers north of Vancouver, just west of Dawson Creek. And as we've been telling you, 6 people were found dead inside that school right there, the Tumbler Ridge Secondary School. So while we look at that, a couple things to keep in mind about that school. Even though it's not a small place, maybe a population 2,400, the school itself is spread out enough that one student we spoke with, who had been in mechanics class, said that he was able to go into a secure hold in his classroom and yet not hear what was happening elsewhere in the school. There have been some suggestions earlier today we have not been able to confirm this, but some suggestions that some of this may have happened in the library, not necessarily near the mechanics class. So we're still waiting to find out what happened. We also don't know the 25 people who were injured, where they were. Are they students, teachers? What is the relationship with the shooter? What about the 2 people who were found in a residence? How are they connected to any of this? Again, with some anxiety, looking for some answers, I'm going to go back to John Hernandez. And John, I'm sorry to keep coming back to you, but I'm just wondering if you can piece together what we know about the investigation so far, and if you have any updates on when we're going to hear from the emergency health services with the latest about the care being given to people, because I think people are quite anxious to know how everyone is.
Yeah, well, we did actually get that update from BC Emergency Health Services. Might have left a bit to be desired. They did confirm they received a call at 1:22 p.m. Multiple resources were dispatched to Tumbler Ridge Secondary School. Those included ground ambulances with primary care paramedics, advanced care paramedics, and 2 air ambulances with critical care paramedics, and as well the BC EHS Clinical Operations Area Director was also dispatched. They did confirm some information that we already knew, that 2 of the victims were airlifted out of there in critical condition. Sorry, rather 1 in critical condition and 1 in serious but stable condition. And we also know that there is a 3rd of those patients that did die. This, of course, in addition to the 6 people that were found dead inside Tumbler Ridge Secondary School, as well as 2 other individuals in a residence believed to have been killed in relation to this attack. And we also have heard from police that the suspected shooter died of an apparent suicide, also found in the school. We haven't heard any details about the victims or their identities, whether they're students, teachers, or both. Police haven't told us that, haven't told us the identity of the shooter. We did ask about any potential motivations to police earlier today. Here's what they had to say.
We are not in a place now to be able to understand why and what may have motivated this tragedy. This was a rapidly evolving and dynamic situation, and the swift cooperation from the school, first responders, and the community played a critical role in our response. Our thoughts are with the families, loved ones, and all those impacted by this tragic incident.
So a lot of unknowns still happening right now, but we're sure, families, loved ones are beginning to be the first ones to hear about whether or not they lost their loved ones in Tumbler Ridge today.
John, thanks for that update. So that's interesting that the air ambulances arrived, but did not, in the case of the STARS ambulance, did not transport anyone across the border. And in terms of what happens next, that school is a crime scene now, the Tumbler Ridge Secondary School, so it will be closed for the week. John, if you're still on the line, or maybe Ian, do you happen to know what the plan is for the rest of Tumbler Ridge, the elementary school? What happens in the morning there, John?
Yeah, we understand that the school will be closed for the rest of the week, and who knows after that? That's just preliminary, what we're hearing from police. That could obviously be extended given just the extent of this crime, the investigation, and not to mention the trauma that this community has endured. The Education Ministry did say it's activating trauma and crisis responses in relation to this event. Trauma-informed counselors are being dispatched to support families and staff. So we do know BC's Education District will be sharing a bit more of that information as things continue here. And we do know that some of these supports will be available for community members who maybe weren't directly affected by the shooting as well, but are also experiencing that pain in response to this brutal attack. And we did hear from the Education Ministry as well that a psychiatric liaison officer is already there and will begin supporting people around 10 p.m. local time there. So some things happening, supports for a community that's really going to need to help to get through this time.
Okay, John Hernandez in Vancouver, thank you very much. So, in a statement this evening, the Prime Minister called the shootings in Tumbler Ridge horrific, of course, adding, "I join Canadians in grieving with those whose lives have been changed irreversibly today, and in gratitude for the courage and selflessness of the first responders who risked their lives to protect their fellow citizens. Our ability to come together in crisis is the best of our country, our empathy, our unity, and our compassion for each other." The Prime Minister's office says his upcoming travel plans will be postponed. It is also likely that BC's Premier and others will be heading to Tumbler Ridge. The matter is, when is a good time to arrive? Often it never feels like a good time to arrive when a community is in crisis and there's still work to be done. But they also know that people need some comfort. One of those people might be Chris Norbury, who's a town councillor at Tumbler Ridge. Councillor, thank you for making time for us. I understand your wife is a teacher at Tumbler Ridge Secondary. So first and foremost, how is she?
Well, she's at home, with our daughter, so she's doing well. It was very scary during that time that she was, at the school during this tragedy.
As much, Councillor, as you feel comfortable sharing with us, is there anything you can tell us about her perspective or that of your daughter in terms of what happened today?
It's not really my story to tell.
Mm-hmm.
I apologize. All I can say is that it was an incredibly traumatic experience. The victims of this tragedy, she knew, we knew, the community knew, and we're all. It's going to take some time to heal, and we're all going to have to come together as a community to heal. Our students, our first responders, our teachers, our parents, they've gone through this incredibly tragic event that we're going to have to live with the rest of their lives. And thankfully, my wife is home. Unfortunately, not everyone can say that.
No. How did you find out she was okay, Councillor?
It was a challenge because I was texting. Once I heard from the elementary school that they were on lockdown, I immediately texted my wife to let her know that what was going on, and I contacted her to find out if she was okay. And I didn't hear anything. We got the emergency alert advising us that there's an active shooter at the school where she was, and then the first that I heard that she was okay was when I thought I saw somebody that looked like her evacuating the school. They're evacuating children out of the school, and they're coming up the back. I work a block away from the high school, and I was able to see, and I thought I saw someone that looked like her. And I was very fortunate that the mayor also owns the grocery store, and he called me to let me know that he saw her entering in the community center. And then sometime later, I was able to get a text from her. She was looking after her students, which is amazing. It shows the dedication she has. But that's when I found out, and I was incredibly grateful that the fears that I had for her safety were over.
I can't imagine the heaviness of that weight for you and that moment of wondering if your eyes were playing tricks on you. Are you okay?
Unfortunately, I'm an emotional guy. So the tragedy that has happened is a challenge. I mean, I was a children's librarian for 10 years, and I left. So I know these children. I've seen them grow up. I've interacted with them. We sang stories together. We read books together. I saw them in the community. I saw them at their sporting events. I saw them everywhere. And knowing that I can't see them anymore, that we won't see them anymore, that their family has to live with this incredible loss that I can't imagine. Just the fear of something happening to my family is almost unbearable. And now they have to live with this the rest of their lives. And I'm afraid for them. I'm afraid for the rest of our community, feeling that loss, that they're going to have to live with this. And I really truly hope that they realize they're not alone, that Tumbler Ridge is a strong community. We're a resilient community. We've gone through a lot of challenges and a lot of emergencies, and we've always come together to stand together to survive. And I hope we can all fall back on that experience. Nothing this tragic, nothing this devastating. But we know that we're a small community, and we all care about each other because we know each other. And I really hope that we can call a friend, call a neighbor, call a family member, and talk before another tragedy strikes. Because this is what this is. This is a tragedy, and I just can't help but just keep thinking about the children, the families, and I'm playing that. Unfortunately, I'm playing that what if game, and I hope there's no more what ifs. Tumbler Ridge. I really appreciate the outpouring support that we've received from a national level, international level, and please continue to send any support you can, because as much as I believe in Tumbler Ridge, and I know we will get through this, we'll definitely need all the support we can get.
And you made the excellent point that people are reaching out. I mean, there's a country of people right now who I know have been reaching out and also been saying, like, what does help look like? Like, what can we possibly do that would be useful to you? Do you have a sense of that?
It's tough because the help people need is always different, right? For some people that might be talking to someone in person, like you need to see somebody in front of you, and having that connection can help. Maybe it's a hug. Maybe it's organizing community events where we can come together as groups to talk about how this tragedy has affected us. Maybe it is just phone calls. Maybe it's virtual support. But people are still trying to understand what happened. And the next stage will be grief. And that's an incredible burden that people are going to have to bear. That I would implore that all of our government agencies to come to Tumbler Ridge to provide that support in any way they can. In person is always better, but we'll take whatever we can get, because I would hate for another tragedy to strike our town after this.
And for all the pain, I'm sure in a way you feel privileged to have had that hug with your wife tonight, right? Because so many people in your community did not get that, won't get that. You must have a lot of questions, councillor, and I know you said that you do and some people do, but I'm curious, like, what's your core question tonight?
Off the top of my head is why? How did this happen? I'm stuck now in the what if game. Right? What could have happened? What could have been done better? As more information comes out, we'll know more about what happened. But at this point in time, I'm trying to focus on how our community can persevere. Like that's my goal now, is to think about how I can help my community to come together, and how I can try and get each other to support each other, because I know that we will, and how to encourage those who may feel that they're alone, that they're not alone. Because I would hate to think in this situation that this child, this person who perpetrated this crime, maybe they felt alone, and if they, it's impossible. It's impossible to guess what the motivations were, but I just hope people know that they're not alone, and we love each other. We love you. We care for you, and don't let this tragedy be the defining moment of your life. I mean, it will be for many people, but we have a lot to live for.
You do. It's generous of you to offer compassion to, the circumstances of whoever did this. But from all of us, can you also please extend a thank you to your wife? In a moment of crisis, to keep her head down and focus on looking after the kids in her care is what every parent would ever hope of a good teacher. And that's, yeah, she did a huge thing there, and I hope you both get some rest, because I think you're going to need it.
Thank you. I appreciate your kind words.
It's Tumbler Ridge Town Councillor Chris Norbury. So, Ian, just as you listen to this councillor, I am struck tonight by how calm everyone is, and some of that might be shock and fatigue, but how generous people are and how caring they are about their community.
He asks the question that everybody must ask a version of when a horrible thing like this happens, which is why, but he asked it so gently and so compassionately. And also, I get the sense that he knows who did this.
Yes.
And that what if game that he's playing, that he described as a game, is what if that person had, I don't know, been treated differently, been received differently. I'm not sure. I don't know that person, but I get the sense that he does. The other thing I'd say, Adrian, is that in the interviews that I did earlier tonight with a lot of politicians, municipal, provincial, and federal, they were all the same, and I say that in a good way. Like they were struggling to figure out what to say. They were struggling to figure out what they wanted to know next. And none of them, not a single one, and these are people from different political parties, focused in, none of them focused in on what they perceived as the problem. You know, was it the weapon? Was it mental illness? Was it this? Was it that? They didn't do that. And I don't know if that day will come, maybe when there's more information about what happened, but it certainly isn't going on tonight. I mean, it's just a matter of a community struggling to try to come together. So I admire that.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot to admire in this community, an awful lot. Ian, earlier we spoke with Darryl Quist, this grade 12 student at Tumbler Ridge Secondary School, another calm, reasoned, gentle, and still, I sense, frightened person. Let's have a listen to how Darryl described what happened.
I was just getting off my spare block and I was in the mechanics classroom preparing to do some work on my car when the alarm went off that I've never heard before. And our principal goes throughout the halls and she's saying, people close your doors, lock down, stuff like that. I thought it was a secure and hold and something like that at first. But once things started circulating, we realized how serious it really was. So we all barricaded up the doors with some iron tables and sat in that room for around 2 hours. I was on my phone with my mother the entire time. And about 2 hours and 30 minutes passed when we went onto lockdown. RCMP got in. We're telling everyone to put their hands up, and we were all escorted out of the building and sent towards the community center where I met up with her in person.
Chris describing what happened. Sitting beside him was his mom, Shelley. And if I can paint a picture for you here, the school, a small school, but spread out enough so that Darryl didn't hear what was happening. Across the courtyard from the school is the health center. That's where his mom, Shelley, was working. So she could sort of look out the window and see some of the chaos that was happening. We heard earlier from the town councillor, who also was within eyesight of what was happening, realized he thought he recognized his wife being safely evacuated, heard from the mayor, who was at a store, who also had eyes on the school, and who confirmed that his wife had been evacuated because he too had seen this. So this school is at the epicenter of a whole bunch of buildings in Tumbler Ridge, which means a whole bunch of people were able to were within proximity of what was happening. Terrible moments for all of them. Can we bring in John Hernandez from the Vancouver newsroom again? So I think, John, do you have a few more details about the investigation so far?
Yes, for sure. Yeah, you can imagine, as you mentioned, just that fear and confusion that must have been happening at that moment of time as this unfolded in Tumbler Ridge. As we have heard, around 1:20 p.m., that's when police did get the initial call that there was an active shooter at Tumbler Ridge Secondary School, a very small school in a small community in northeastern BC, just 2,400 residents in this community. Now, we do know when police did arrive, they found 6 people dead inside the school. They also found 3 more people suffering severe and serious injuries. Attempts were made to airlift all 3 of them out of there. 2 did make it to urgent hospital care. The 3rd one, however, died. Police did find 2 other people in a residence that were dead in what's believed to be connected to this shooting. And lastly, the shooter was found dead inside the school of an apparent suicide. Now, as you mentioned, the school quite close to that medical center in Tumbler Ridge. We know 25 people were also injured and assessed, triaged at that medical center. Small community, a relatively small healthcare infrastructure when you think about comparing it to a place like Metro Vancouver, for example. However, police say first responders did step up during this crisis.
I can tell you that without the clinic and the support of those professionals, this would have been a far worse outcome for those that were injured and treated by the clinic. The clinic has triaged the victims to the best of my knowledge. We have had victims airlifted out of the community that required more critical care.
A lot of unknowns still related to this case. We did ask police questions about the identities of the victims, and we said those weren't being released for privacy reasons at this time, as well as the identity of the shooter. Police also didn't offer any answers on the weapon in particular that was used. So still a lack of clarity when it comes to a lot of the questions that we have here. Adrienne.
Okay, John Hernandez, thank you very much for that. Appreciate that. Let's bring in a man named George Rowe now. So he is a pastor at Tumbler Ridge Baptist Church. Pastor, what a terrible night for you. I'm so sorry you've been through this. I know you were at the rec center where some of the family members are gathering. And without violating anyone's privacy or dignity, can you give us a sense of that place and those people tonight?
Wow, it's kind of a difficult question to answer, but when I walked into the rec center, it was so surreal. I'm questioning, like, is this really happening? My wife and I have lived here for 35 wonderful years, and of course, have never experienced anything close to this. And to walk in there today and to greet and meet some family members, it was very, very emotional. Very, very difficult. And the uncertainty of not knowing, because the emergency people have got to follow proper protocol and procedure, et cetera, et cetera. And so to see moms and dads just waiting to see whether their child survived or not is a very agonizing moment. And just to be there and just to show up, I think brought comfort to some of them to know that the community is so supporting them and so behind them.
That wait must feel so cruel when, you know, not getting an answer when probably deep down they have the answer or their neighbors have the answer. How do you possibly talk with people in that moment? I can't imagine how you calm someone down, or do you just listen?
You listen and you speak with a lot of care and caution. And it's amazing that deep within yourself, or myself as a spiritual leader in the community, you have resources hidden kind of deep down inside of you, so that when you face something like this, it's like you just regurgitate the skills and just talk and listen. You need to listen a lot. And they appreciate that, because I don't have the answers and they don't have the answers. In the meantime, they're just waiting for the inevitable. I mean, it's been a number of hours since this tragedy, and their children have not been returned to them. So obviously they're thinking the worst of the worst. And you empathize and you sympathize, you pray with them, and just hope and pray that time to a point will heal and will bring some answers for sure.
Pastor, do any of them know the fate of their children or their loved ones? I mean, are they all still waiting with uncertainty, or some, or some answers starting to come in?
Yeah, they're waiting with uncertainty. And I listened to some of the emergency people responding to the parents, and I could appreciate and understand where they were coming from. But nothing had yet been authenticated. So families are just left. They may hear before the night is out. They may hear sometime tomorrow. But that waiting in itself, it's just almost overbearing. I mean, even myself, I'm sitting here, and it's so surreal. I keep asking myself the question, like, did it really happen? But when you go and face the parents, you know it did. And the question as to why it happened will take a long time before it's answered.
Pastor, you may not know the answer to this, but were these all children?
To my knowledge, they were all children. That's at the school scene. From the others, the second site, I'm not sure. But to my knowledge, they were children, or at least high school students.
Terrible. And who is informing them? Is it the RCMP who is informing them? Because it seems like there just aren't that many RCMP officers there. I don't know. The resources must be coming in from all over the place.
We've had folk coming in from Prince George, Chatwin, Dawson Creek, Vancouver, Victoria. They're in constant contact with us up here as well. And the 5 RCMP officers we have were excellent in their response and did a wonderful job. But we've got a lot of support. I personally have gotten calls from right across the country, pledging their support and their prayers and their thoughts with the people of Tumbler Ridge. And that in itself kind of warms your heart.
You know, I know you're a pastor, and it is in the DNA to sort of be there for people and offer comfort. Have you ever been in a situation quite like this?
Not to this extent. I've been involved in tragedies where there have been 1 or 2 involved in my past experience as pastor, but nothing to this extent.
And are you okay?
It's all I can say is I personally find it pretty tough. There was a time when I was teaching at that same high school, and our kids went through high school and graduated there. And to look at that school now brings a lot of emotion, and it'll be a long time getting over that. And if I feel that way, even as a former teacher there, I can't imagine what the parents and teachers are going through today. And so, yeah, just do what I can to reach out to other people, and hopefully in some way we'll be able to bring comfort. And the other pastors in the community are also involved, and we're very grateful for that.
Sure. Pastor, can you help me understand something about the school itself? Because we were speaking with a great young man named Darryl, very eloquent, who was describing going into a classroom. He'd just finished a spare, and I think he was coming also out of a mechanics classroom. So he went in, and it was in a hold and secure. But he said he didn't hear anything. Is the school that big that something this terrible could be happening on another floor or another wing, and people wouldn't hear?
It's not the size of the school, it's the layout of the school that would cause that. The acoustics, you would not pick up loud noises from one end of the school to the other unless you're in close proximity. So I listened to that interview, and he was correct where he was. He probably would not have heard any shooting unless the doors were open.
Okay. And one last
So
thought. I'm sorry, say again, Pastor?
I say it's more with the layout of the school rather than the size of it.
Understood. One last thought for you, sir. What would you want Canada to know about Tumbler Ridge tonight?
if you want a place to retire and enjoy the sunset years of life, come out. It's a beautiful, closely knit community. And like I said, my wife and I came here 35 years ago and fell in love with it. And the people just love each other. It's amazing. There's about 2,500 people, and you meet people every day. And just to say hi, how you doing? Have a good day. Very, very friendly. Beautiful town.
Well, sir, not that it will make a whit of difference to people who in their worst moment, but if you're speaking with them, please let them know how much the country is worried about them. And
Absolutely.
people coast to coast to coast are sending them their best and wondering what they can do to help.
I really appreciate that, and wherever I can, that message will be passed forward.
Thank you, sir. That is George Rowe,
Thank you.
the pastor at Tumbler Ridge Baptist Church. So, Ian, going back to you, what a tough situation that is, to be the one to have to be in the room with parents and you who are still waiting to find out what the truth is. And if the pastor is correct, at the school, it was all children.
Yeah, I mean, so it's after 10 p.m. in Tumbler Ridge. They're on Mountain Time. And it's in this business, you never know certain things unless you ask, right? And it hadn't occurred to me until that interview that there would be families, parents, who at this late hour still don't know the fate of their kids. All they know is they haven't been reunited with their kids. And I just, it makes me sad to think about waiting and having, you know, some hope that there's that your kid's okay, but you just haven't been connected with them. Boy, that is that's difficult. And on the one thing we heard from the pastor that we've heard from other people tonight is the importance of reaching out. You know, whether it's people in other parts of the country. And I know that there are people who have been reaching out to this community from other parts of the country, but also the importance of having face-to-face contact as well when people want that. There's a lot of healing to be done, and it's going to come in different ways. And but boy, people in Tumbler Ridge certainly are getting a lot of support across the country, as they should, and they seem to be aware of that.
And there will come a time when the patience is no more, when they need some answers and start demanding some answers about, first and foremost, their own kids. But then, what happened? Who was this? How did this happen? How do we make sure it doesn't happen again? It feels like at this point, people are still living in that terrible limbo of hope and fear, and they're just focusing on what they need to focus. But it feels like in the days to come, the demand for answers will grow stronger. Earlier, we reached the Tumbler mayor. We were speaking with him, Darryl Krakowka, over the phone, and he explained where he was when the alert first went out and his sense of how the community is coping. Let's have a listen to that.
I just talked to the residents of the community. I mean, some definitely have youth and children in our community, and you know, I just was able to get out of the town hall after the alert was taken down from the shelter in place and lock your door. So again, the community is grieving. I mean, it's a big tragedy here in Tumbler Ridge for today, what's happened. And again, we're one big family here. We might have residents, but I call them a big family. And you know, we're going to come together and make sure we have ears when people want to talk and shoulders. And to me, hugs are going to be a big thing. And as we work through this process with our family members of the community.
So just to wrap up what the mayor said there, again, I want to paint another picture, if I can, for you of the community. So you have Tumbler Ridge School, Tumbler Ridge Secondary School. We've heard from a number of people here. It's not a big school, but the way it's laid out is such that some students could have been one part of the school and known that there was an alert, so they went into a lockdown mode, but did not hear the shooting that was happening elsewhere in the school. And I'm going to say presuming it's shooting because we don't know anything about the weapon yet. Also, where that school complex is in sort of a municipal complex, if you will. So across effectively a field or parking lot is the health center. That is where many of the wounded would have been initially taken. It's also where many of the people working at that health center, like the mom, Shelley, of Darryl, who we spoke with, heard what was happening, looked out the window, and then tried frantically to get in contact with her own child. Also across from that school would have been sort of the municipal hall. That's where councillors have been. So it's not just that this happened in a community, it happened right in front of everyone. And that's something that they're still going to have to deal with. The what happened question, Ian, this is the question that the councillor asked, as you described it so gently. What if whatever was going on with this person was addressed earlier, would that have made a difference? These questions are haunting.
And sometimes never answered, right? I think that's something you said earlier on in our coverage. Sometimes it is, but often it isn't, or the answer is not very satisfying. And so, yeah, they'll have to work through that. The power of resilience. You know, I've done some episodes of Cross Country Checkup where we have talked about communities going through tragedies, and we've had psychiatrists or counselors on, and they talk about the incredible human capacity for resilience. But I also think about how these kinds of events can bring together a town in resilience, a community, or it can divide a community. And I mean, every indication we have tonight is that this is a community that is very united and a big family. But boy, that's going to potentially be tested over the next few days.
And it's not supposed to happen. Parents are supposed to be able to send their kids to school with the expectation that they will come home at night. And this did not happen. This is not happening in Tumbler Ridge tonight. So, Ian, thank you very much for this. I'm going to go back to John Hernandez, if I may, because I just give us just a sense, John, of where things sit in terms of the investigation tonight, where things sit in terms of what needs to happen now.
Yeah, well, I don't expect we're going to be hearing much else from the BC RCMP tonight. I would imagine they would provide an update tomorrow morning, just given the extent of what has happened today. Just to run through it again, I mean, police called to an active shooter at Tumbler Ridge Secondary School, finding 6 people dead inside. They also found 2 people dead at a nearby residence, and then 3 people were airlifted to hospital. 1 of those died en route. The other 2 in serious condition, and 25 people injured, and not a whole lot of answers beyond that. Of course, we did hear from Pastor George Rowe suggesting that these were all children that were found dead in the school. Couldn't speak for the residences. I will run through a statement from the Parent Advisory Council, Nicole Naksana, the Parent Advisory Council of the elementary school and secondary school in Tumbler Ridge, saying that the PAC is heartbroken by these events that occurred today. Thoughts are with the students, staff, families who have been directly impacted by this. Noxana does go on to say that at this time, we encourage the community to rely on information shared by officials and law enforcement and to respect the privacy of those affected as those details continue to emerge. That's from Nicole Noxana, the Parent Advisory Council Chair, kind of reiterating some of what we heard from the Premier tonight, calling for essentially patience as we await these answers. But obviously, this is what's on everybody's mind at this moment. All of the people in this community of 2,400 that were affected by this tragic shooting. Answers to come out. We hope to hear more tomorrow morning from police, and as well as an update on the status of those 25 who are injured. Adrian.
John Hernandez, thank you very much. I know there's so much more reporting to go for you, but we really appreciate what you've been able to help us with tonight. I know the questions are indeed piling up. Just to recap for everyone here, as we follow all the details breaking tonight about the mass shooting, which includes a school shooting in Tumbler Ridge, British Columbia. We know at least 10 people are dead, including the alleged shooter. Many of the deceased killed at a local high school. 2 of them were killed at home. As we've been hearing from people in Tumbler Ridge, an incredibly difficult night for that community, which is an understatement to say the least. Thank you for staying with us. We're going to continue to stay on top of this. There are just too many questions, too many worries to do otherwise. Please take care of yourselves and each other. I'm Adrienne Arsenault. This has been The National.